There's a delay of about 30 seconds. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us at the IDeaS Summer Institute today. And Dr. Tucker, take it away whenever you are ready.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks the IDeaS for organizing this session. We're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. I know that we're on Zoom, but I do have parts of the presentation that I would appreciate your feedback. And if you can see James's icon there, we'll be fielding questions on the chat. And so let's go ahead and get started. Please feel free to interrupt whenever you have a question. We don't have to necessarily wait for the end of the session. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my...
Jennifer? Yep, I see your Teams session, not your slides.
Oh, you don't see my PowerPoint?
Nope. There, now I see it.
Good. Okay, great. So today we're going to talk about the intersection between AI and policy. And it really pertains to the classification of online media. And so we describe online media as anything digital that has the ability to be shared online. So to kind of motivate this session, we will go through just the general conceptual process of learning and how we've replicated this process using with machines. So as people, we have our senses that acquire data, and over time we develop some type of mental model of our environment. And if you think of a lot of things that we do on a daily basis, it really pertains to classification task. Is this a car? Is this a plane? Is this a Zoom session or PowerPoint presentation? And we get feedback on how accurate we are in the classification task. So this process has been replicated for machines, where we have artificial sensors and artificial models. So just to really motivate this, I'm going to give a quick quiz. Please feel free to, I know that we're not raising our hands, but just keep a mental note of your response. So we're going to start very simple, and I am going to ask you, what is this? James, is there a way to see some of the responses on the chat?
Yes, if they come in, I will start listing them off. Also,
okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. So we're going to pause here until we get some responses, because this builds upon what follows after this.
Bam, in quick succession, we've got 3 apples.
Okay, we have 3 apples.
4
now,
apples.
one of the 4 apples.
I'm sorry.
Well, one of the, I guess, challenges of teaching machines is that they are quite literal. So there are certain characteristics of a physical apple that differ from a picture of an apple, right? So this would be more analogous to a picture because it's lacking texture, geometry, and all these kinds of things. So I'll take your response as an apple in the general sense, but if we really wanted to specify, this would be a picture of an apple. Okay, it gets a bit harder. I'm going to ask you this. So what is... Any responses, James?
Not yet, sir.
Okay.
We've got a banana, and then we've got a couple of pictures of bananas. We're a learning audience, and we picked up clues from the first iteration.
Great. Any other responses other than banana, picture of a banana,
Picture of a yellow banana, picture of a
yellow?
ripe banana.
Okay. Well, if you said any of the above, it would be incorrect because what I showed here was an actual picture of a plantain, which is geometrically quite similar to a picture of a banana that you would buy at the grocery store, but the actual way that these different foods are processed and eaten varies quite substantially. So the picture here is actually a picture of a plantain, not a banana. So if we think of this task of classification and extrapolate of the many classification tasks that we deal with on a daily basis, you can start to see that sometimes some of the things that we classify, or we think we know what they are, can be either incorrect or not completely accurate. So how did we get to this point? Well, I imagine many of you have seen more bananas in your lifetime than you have plantains. And in the same way that we talk about AI being overfitting to training data, this is analogous to your experiences and perhaps overfitting to the experiences of seeing more bananas. And coincidentally, I did the same kind of activity and survey in a West African country, Sierra Leone, and almost everyone in the audience got that right. Everyone almost got this, that this was a plantain. And again, why may that be the case? Plantain is a more staple food that's eaten in certain parts of the world, and I would love to do. I'm actually someone has asked me, why don't you do an actual scientific study, maybe even have a grant? But it would be very interesting to see how the response to this question differs from country to country. So if we think about what actually happened here, you were presented with two images and something happening in your brain based on experiences in the past led to the classification of one object being a picture of a banana, a plantain, and one being an apple. And the emergence of artificial neural networks are very loosely, it's not a one-to-one, but very loosely inspired by biological neural networks. And specifically, more recently, this idea of generative neural networks, specifically generative adversarial networks, that was proposed by Ian Goodfellow and his colleagues back in 2014. Before we go any step further, if we could just get a quick response in the chat, how many people have heard of GANs? Just a simple yes or no, and that will kind of provide some good feedback in terms of how deep we should go into explaining the concept behind GANs. Any responses?
6 yeses and 3 nos, 7 yeses, 3 nos.
Okay, so
about
it seems
70% yes.
All right, so a majority of people have heard the term GANs. If you have not, just for those who have not, you can think of this as two networks that are learning in an iterative manner. And in essence, what this has allowed neural networks or artificial neural networks to be able to do is not only classify things, but also create. And so the generator learns to generate new data that then fools the discriminator into thinking that it comes from the same data distribution as it was trained on. So that would be like the generator learning how to create pictures of apples and all sorts of things. And ever since this was proposed, it has exploded in the scientific community. You can hear everything GAN, this GAN, that GAN, but in essence, it's being able to teach computers how to create things. So here's your next quiz. So given the recent advancements in capabilities of GANs and these types of algorithms, I'm going to show you these two faces, and I'm going to ask you which, if any, are AI generated faces. It could be one of them, it could be both, it could be neither, it could be a trick question. What are your thoughts? Which
We've
picture?
got neither, two neithers. We've got one for right, two for right, three for right, two for both,
Okay.
one for left. No idea.
No
Like
idea.
the honest answers.
I appreciate that. I want you to look closely at these pictures and just imagine if the possibility of if I gave you the task, you as a human, to sketch a picture of any one of these faces, how well could you do the task? And so, is it possible for an AI to achieve these capabilities? And so, if you answered both, you would be correct. The pictures that you see here are from a paper from Style GAN, where neural networks are able to generate these high fidelity pictures of faces that do not exist. So again, this isn't just recreating a picture. This is actually creating a face that, using these GAN models, that does not exist. But just like you're seeing here, when you look at this picture, you're like, yeah, this is, I could imagine this being a person that I could meet out in the street, right? So the fidelity, and I really want you to pay close attention to even, the wrinkles, the specks of hair on the facial features, and ask yourself, well, how do we get to this point where AI is able to generate these hyper realistic data sets? And this paper is actually a couple of years old. The field is moving so fast that not only can faces be created, but even videos of people. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. So now that we start to have these capabilities, you can imagine some of the challenges that start to emerge. So if we went to the example of a banana and an apple, imagine now where you have the scenario where you have machines that are able to generate high fidelity data that can then be publicly shared through online platforms and social media networks at scale. And so one of the projects that CMU is leading in collaboration with the RAND and the Challenger Center is, as we move more towards a digital means and hybrid means of interaction, how, as students or educators, how do we decipher what is real in this kind of digital landscape? And before I go a step further, I know that we've I've introduced several topics. I just want to open the floor to any questions that you may have up until this point.
Dr. Tucker, we have one. AI still can't generate the same fake face from different angles. Can it? Question mark.
There are techniques that can generate. In fact, there are algorithms that can generate a 3D model of your face. This is another project that we're working on. So imagine you give an AI model a picture of your face, and just based on that picture, it is able to generate what the three-dimensional version of your face would look like. Are you able to see my screen? Let me just show a quick video I just made from this. So can you see this video here of these faces?
Yes, sir.
Okay. this 3D model that we actually have sent to a 3D printer was created based on just a picture of someone's face, just a 2D picture. And so we are in a scenario now where AI is able to not only generate different angles of a face, but actually create an entire three-dimensional mesh model as you're seeing here. Great question. Any other questions?
Not at this time, sir.
Okay. Please, I just don't want this to be me talking the whole time. So the more interaction that you have and the more engaging and interesting it is for me, because I don't have all the answers, and I do at the end. We're going to open up the floor to just a general discussion of what should be some of the policy decisions and who should be making those decisions, because the answer isn't really as you know, clear as it should. Okay, and we'll get to why that is. Okay, so just highlighted the challenge of having all of these hyper realistic data that's generated by AI being publicly available, which increases the challenges of seekers of knowledge, students, educators, deciphering what is real and what's fake. So to make matters even more challenging, just given a picture, and I just want you to think of how much of a breakthrough this is. Given just a picture of someone's face, this could even be your face. You're now able to. So imagine the pictures in the middle: source image 1, source image 2, and source image 3. Imagine source image 4 as a picture of your face. Just one picture. Now, someone else can animate that face. You can see that's actually my PhD student on the far left there, speaking in his video, and now on the far right, being able to animate those pictures that were once static, and now you're able to not only move their lips and eyes, but also move some of their head positions. Now, some of you, I believe Jennifer shared a survey with you where you were asked to determine if the video that you were seeing was real or fake. And this is more on the back end of that survey of how they actually work. And the field is moving at very rapid paces. This is 2019, and AI timelines, this is almost a dinosaur at this point. So the field is moving fast. Additional challenges that exist is that studies have shown that people gravitate more to social media posts that have images, right? So you've seen the capabilities that AI is able to accomplish. You see the study that shows as a society, we're more susceptible to social media messages that do contain images. What's more troubling, and this is a paper that we recently published, which shouldn't come too much as a surprise, is just the challenge that individuals have in determining what is authentic and fake video. So these are a mix of real and fake videos, and many times, in fact, in some of these cases, the orange, people were more oftentimes incorrect in sharing fake videos as they were in sharing authentic videos. So we come to this technology evolution or revolution of social media networks. Initially, when you had social media networks, they were primarily created as a communication medium to share pictures and stories with friends. And so that's where we're going to start today is just looking at social media and human and computer networks as a communication medium. So I'm not sure how many of you, who can tell me actually where this quote is from? The quote that you see in that text there that asks, what is real? How do you define real? I should have given a prize to the first response that can get this right. Any responses in the chat?
Not yet, sir.
Okay.
Turing test, Matrix, Morpheus.
Matrix, Morpheus, whoever said that, kudos. I just became a great fan of you. That is one of my favorite movies, questioning our understanding of reality and just highlighting the challenges of deciphering what real and fake is when we have these capabilities of creating digital realities. So this is where the starting point of this policy decision starts from. Social media networks, you have a source, you can consider this you're connected by friends and followers. They are also connected by friends and followers. And before you know it, you have a network where information can be propagated almost at the speed in which the information is being created. So the question I want you to start thinking about, given the challenges of deciphering what is real versus fake as it comes to AI generated data, given the prevalence and interconnectivity of our networks, both in person and social media networks, who should be responsible for determining what real and fake is? And how would you go about doing that from an implementation point of view? This is data that we collected over a year time frame that geotagged different social media messages. In fact, the number of messages has since then increased dramatically, where you have over 500 million tweets each day. As you can see, one of the challenges is that the prevalence or the geotag isn't even uniformly distributed, right? In this case, there were just, for some reason, in the Midwest or Western parts didn't see as prevalent of geotag tweets as other parts. With this prevalence of data, researchers have now started to use social media networks as sensing systems. So the traditional way of sensing what was going on in the world was to have, engineered systems that maybe sensed earthquakes or fires or other types of events. And with the prevalence of social media networks, you can think of people and their networks as being this connected network that could also sense events. So this is one paper that looked at disaster response that really showed that social media networks, or the distribution when people saw a natural disaster and messaged about it, actually was quite representative of where the natural disaster damage had occurred. So these are being used as approximations of different sensing modalities. And even in our lab, we've used social media networks to make inferences about electricity utilization in different parts. So rather than having smartphones and not smartphones, smart thermostats and smart meters, you could actually get a sense of how much energy was being utilized in a particular geographic region just based on how people tweeted or messaged about the event itself. This is prior to COVID, but this is an example where we were looking at using social media messages to discover diseases that may not have been classified with a particular name yet, but individuals were expressing symptoms that you can then apply an algorithm to see if this was an emerging new type of disease. And so just showing the diversity of uses of social media data. But all of these uses and applications of social media data hinge upon one critical aspect, that the data that is shared in these networks is accurate. It is not, more noise than there are signals. And given the prevalence of AI generated information, then you can start seeing how this could be a potential national security threat. So much so that the Air Force and the Department of Defense in general has not now started to realize the power of social media networks and AI in general in impacting not only uh, political landscapes, but even our economic system. I'm not sure if anyone remembers this event where the Twitter account of the Associated Press was hacked, and this message went out that there had been an explosion in the White House, and almost immediately the stock market lost, I believe it was 2% or $140 billion in value, just like that, just based on this compromise. And what's even more concerning is that where you see the correction here on that graph, it didn't happen until they were able to access their account again. Now you can imagine if you have multiple things simultaneously going on. You have this tweet that comes out. You have information of an AI generated White House on fire. You have information of an AI generated president that's speaking about an event. All of these operating together can really start to present chaos and increase the risk of societal harm if we don't think of policies that are going to mitigate these risks, right? So instead of using sensors, if we start relying on social media, for example, as a sensor, the semantics of what actually happened is not as easy as just looking at a tweet. Because, for example, if you're using the word bomb to search, because of the way that the word bomb can be used, you can't just say, I'm just going to find all the tweets related to bomb. So we're now going to really open up. I hope that we have a healthy discussion and share ideas on, given these complexities, who should be responsible from a policy perspective in mitigating the prevalence of AI-generated fake data in social media platforms, and in the event that these breaches occur, what should be the penalties for these individuals? And I would really like someone to, are we unmuting mics, or are we just taking questions via chat?
Yes, sir, we can unmute. If
Well, let's
you
go
would
ahead
like
and unmute.
to,
Yep.
if you'd like to speak, go ahead and raise your hand and I will call on you. And this would be a great time, instead of typing your questions, to participate in the conversation. Go ahead, Izzy.
I guess I'm thinking about, I think that at least there should be some at the expense, or like the cost should be covered, I think, by these social media platforms. So I'm thinking about, I was working on a research project a couple years ago, which we were auditing probabilistic genotyping software that's used to, in criminal cases for determining like the DNA evidence. And, we were using a lot of time and labor and resources towards it. And it was sort of, I think ProPublica also did a piece about some of these similar things, not our work, but how a lot of people are doing this work for these companies that they really should be doing themselves, I think. So I guess I don't have an answer completely to your question, but I do think that it feels a little bit unfair that people spend all these time and resources doing jobs for that platforms should be doing themselves, in my opinion.
Okay, so let's start with that premise that the platforms themselves should be responsible for identifying and removing this content. So let's go back to this video I showed of Twitter. And again, this number has increased since then. But let's go with the 500 million tweets per day. And let's just assume that some way we have to process these 500 million tweets and make sure that none of the tweets had a fake video of a president giving a false, an AI generated president giving a false statement on the current affairs that would either manipulate the stock market, cause harm in society. How would we go about doing this? Should we hire 500 million people or one person that's processing? What would this look like from an implementation point of view? Any ideas? So, of course, we don't have the answers to these questions yet. I mean, these are some of the discussions that are happening on the national and international scale. But it's easy to criticize, and I do want us to have a discussion. Let's say you were in charge. What would you come up with?
We have a question in the chat. The publisher of the data should do their best in the initial labeling of the data. This is a matter of raising publishing standards.
Okay, so are you considering the person here, you, as the publisher of the data?
Yes.
Okay, so we are then going to transform every single social media user into a publisher. Just to clarify the question, and whoever proposed that, is that what is being suggested? So now everyone that is, just before you hit send, any message that you hit, you make sure that you are pretty sure that it is accurate.
Waiting for a typed response, sir.
Okay.
I could go to somebody that has their hand raised while we're waiting for that.
Maybe
All right, go
that.
ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I guess to the kind of initial question, I would see it, the platform's probably funding a team, whatever you want to call it, threat intelligence, probably like a two-step system where it's a big automated dragnet looking for anything that's suspicious, and then that's sent over to a team of real people for further analysis. And if it's a company like Facebook, you'll probably need regional experts, so you'd be responsible for hiring people all over the world to do content moderation. But that's like my initial thoughts. I don't see how anyone but platforms would pay for it. Maybe some legislation to force them to have this in place if they do want to like make money from ads and things like that. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, so I don't know how many messages a single person can review per minute or per hour. But if one platform alone is generating 500 million messages, are you suggesting that the social media companies just accept that as a cost of doing business and hire as many people, even if it's, let's say, 10,000 people to go through the 500 million messages a day?
No, definitely like a first step where there's an automated system looking for keywords or suspicious activity to cut down that bulk. But then I think at the end of the day, you need a human to, again, differentiate between I bombed a test versus did you just hear a bomb go off? And if I'm not mistaken, I believe Facebook did hire a ton of people in 2018 to do just that. Like they really doubled or maybe tripled their workforce. So I think there's some evidence for it.
Okay. So how would we then solve the issue of you now have a person who sees the apple and the banana, and you could relate this back to any real world societal challenge of bias and having humans do this task?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is maybe where like a regional oversight kind of comes in. I think there are certain catchphrases that might work in one country where in another country they might have a whole different historical context to it. Again, I have read stuff for like Facebook what didn't take something down in like a bunch of European countries, but then when it came to Ethiopia, the message did carry this historical context and they ultimately took it down. So, but again, that's expensive, right? But the people who probably can do it are people like Google, just massive companies.
Okay. And what are your thoughts on, and this, I guess, is just the human biases, right? So again, this example just shows that our experiences influence our realities. And, for now, the gold standard is humans as the kind of last line of defense. You said first apply an algorithm, and then after the algorithm, then apply a human. But if the algorithms themselves are trained based on human feedback, right? So if we go back to this feedback right now that machines use to learn how to classify, primarily is coming from people providing that ground truth. And if people themselves are biased, wouldn't that accelerate in essence, scaling human biases and then applying them to algorithms?
I don't. Yeah, I'm going to say yes. I think that happens today, and I think one way to counter that is to kind of almost create some synthetic data sets to try and unbias the data. But I'll leave it for other people to join in.
All right. Other thoughts?
Go ahead, Izzy.
Yeah.
Sure. So I guess I had a few things. I do think that the company should have to pay for it. I don't want them doing it themselves. And I think the issue here isn't yes, humans are biased, but also if we're talking about how these images are being classified, I guess it's also who is doing this work and who's making the decisions, and sort of like demographically speaking, who is in tech is hugely biased, right? It's not as diverse as the human beings who are using the systems. So, and they have different motives, I think. So I think that I wouldn't want Facebook to be hiring a bunch of people to do it. I think that Facebook should maybe be taxed, or there should be regulation to give, academics access to data to be doing this, as well as like regulation on things. And, but I guess I don't like the idea of this continued self-regulation of these companies. And again, if it's primarily cishet white men, young, making the decisions, I think that also like is part of the reason why the things are so biased, right? So I guess that's another question, is yes, humans are biased, but also part of it is who's making decisions.
Okay. Very good thoughts and insights. Any additional comments on relying on humans to make decisions and biases?
Circling back to TAM, micro publishers are already using hashtags and mentions as a form of labeling their micro publishing content.
Okay, and if that individual would like to elaborate on how that could possibly help to kind of mitigate these issues of AI generated data and just the speed at which it could propagate through these large scale social media networks.
I think any response to that would best be served over the microphone so we don't lose context as we sync between voice and text. So Tam, if you want to respond to that, please go ahead using your mic if possible.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. I finally able to connect my microphone, so sorry about that. So my initial motivation is that we talk about bias and all the sophisticated ways to twist the original ideas of the original publisher. So I think it's important to empower the publisher, especially if we want to build a democratic society of fair information and fair opinions, freedom of speech. So we need to empower the original publisher and providing them automatic tools so that they themselves, when they publish their original content, can conveniently labeling the data. So with that, because they're the original authors, they with that they can clarify the context and the meaning of their published content. Because what I'm worrying is that with automatic labeling, massive scale by the powerful company like Facebook and Google and other big companies, the fact that labeling the data that someone else posts or share can twist the original context or original meaning of the original authors.
So that's a good distinction. And if you remove the decision of labeling and filtering from the companies themselves, who would be responsible for that?
So so let me clarify my stand. Automatic labeling still necessary in my opinion. But first we need to focus and empower the original labeling of the original author. And then we combine that with automatic and community labeling of data. But let's say when someone try to understand the data, they can distinguish, hey, this is the label of the author, this is the automatic labeling, and this is the community labeling by other humans. So I think those distinctions, I think, are gonna be healthy for building the economy of freedom of speech.
I see. So that presents some insights into the question that I have for everyone, of where sarcasm or what if this video were created because this student on the left wants to create a fun prank or joke and share it with their friend. What are your thoughts on where sarcasm or things that are known to be fake or doctored are disseminated online? What should be the policy around that? Any thoughts?
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting kind of problem, right? Because you can have a lot of either art or other creativity that gets stifled or shut down, or like good social commentary and a bunch of these other things if you're automatically removing anything that isn't quote unquote, real, right? And I think it's a tough problem. I wonder if part of the solution is again trying to just help people make informed decisions where you might label it as such, but you don't remove it. Now it gets into a problem if you're labeling and people don't see the labels, or you're labeling it and that process is too slow, and kind of misinformation that leads to misinformed action is happening too fast. But I think the idea of kind of trying to label and have discussion, that's in its own problem, but labeling it but not removing it maybe helps in that regard, because then people can make the informed decisions to, oh, okay, I understand now that this is fake, or this is an art project, or this is labeled. It's kind of, I think Twitter at some point and some other platforms at some point tried this to kind of force people to, if you're a satire site, you have to call yourself such. I'm not sure how well that's worked out, but I wonder if that's one of the paths you can take, where you're labeling but you're not removing anything.
Yeah, very good. Good proposal there.
And I guess if I can, I have another thought that kind of connects to the issue of. So one issue is the issue that you have maybe intentionally misinforming, or even if not intentionally misinforming, but it just happens to be misinforming information out there. But the other part is the part that you alluded to about how fast it spreads and where it spreads because of how easy it is to hit retweet, right? Versus actually have a conversation. And I wonder if that's the other kind of another path to go on is not so much the trying to shut down the source information, but more trying to help people kind of interact with the platforms in a way that kind of maybe, I'm going to say this. I'm not sure if the companies would ever go for it, because I would imagine it's going to decrease like ad revenue and that kind of thing. But you want people to be a little bit more careful about just retweeting things all the time in the Twitter case, right? And so how do you do that? Can you develop kind of a more cultural or educational kind of thing where you're building people, you're having people that are seeing that information, but not necessarily sharing it on a whim. If they're sharing it with a little bit more intent or commentary. I think that gets in issues of how the platforms themselves are built and what their actually aim is in terms of getting people to do things. But that also might help the issue where, you have stuff out there, but it's not moving fast anymore because people are a little bit more careful. It's kind of like, kind of on the media literacy, media education kind of track.
Right. So speaking of, you bring up a good point about the cultural implications. There's some regions, given the same platform, where the laws and policies across the world differ. There's some regions where, for example, it is, more controversial or even maybe illegal to make fun or mockery or emulate in some way political or religious figures that would get you into significant trouble. Should these platforms have different policies for different countries, or should the kind of American ideals where many of these companies were born out of should be the one size fits all that is spread across the world, regardless of a country or environment that they're in? If there's one country that, anything that's dealing with human rights or any kind of controversial thing from the government, they ban companies from disseminating that. Should the company augment their policies to fit that country or pull out of that country? What are some of the thoughts on?
Dr. Tucker, I have something in the chat from Sarah. Labeling, and it dovetails, I think, to what you guys were just talking about. Labeling sarcasm and microaggressions are alike. These are difficult to detect because they can be community and context specific. And then I have another question. Whenever we're done with the sarcasm, before we move on to a new question, I have a question to inject and circle back on.
Okay, good. So we'll hold the second question for now. But what if, humans we're adaptable? What if then everyone starts claiming that the content that they're making is for sarcastic reasons or humor? Doesn't that bypass these policies or algorithms that would be looking for something literal? If everyone just starts thinking, if everyone starts classifying what they're sharing as more lighthearted, how would we go about doing that? So I don't hear any responses, but I bring up these questions just to highlight the challenges of addressing these. It's not a silver bullet where it's the company's responsibility or it's the government's responsibility. We live in a global landscape where the same platform can be used across different cultures, and because we live in this global community, what may be acceptable in one part of the world may not be acceptable in another part. So there are many challenges of coming up with a policy that is fair and fits everyone's moral and ethical code.
Izzy piped in with humor can also be harmful. I think it's a classic gaslighting technique. I think it's more about harm reduction versus humor or not humor for me.
Okay, so harm reduction versus humor. So it's interesting that hearing the different opinions. Are there any in the audience that are absolute by the definition of freedom of expression at any and all costs, regardless of the societal impact? Anybody willing to take that bold of a stance when it comes to these issues? Okay, well, it seems like either people are reserving their comment or there seems to be an agreement that some compromise should occur for the better societal good of having, I guess, higher veracity of information online. And you said there was another question in the comments. James.
Yes, sir. Going back from Laura, follow-up question to Izzy. What are your thoughts on Facebook's oversight board, a separate entity staffed by people from around the world to assist with content moderation? ? Is this sufficient, or can the platform take other measures?
Well, I think if we take a step back and ask, well, what is the textbook definition of the objective of a firm? If we go for those who have business MBA experience at business school, it's to maximize shareholder value. And are we creating conflicts of interest when we ask these same companies that are beholden to shareholders and by that very creed, maximizing shareholder value, which they can be sued if they are perceived to be making decisions that aren't maximizing shareholder value, to then ask that same company to restrain itself from making decisions that maximize shareholder value may introduce some complexities that make it difficult to disambiguate an oversight board from the company's mission itself. It seems as though we need to have a broader societal conversation and come up with policies that fit the norms and cultures of different regions. So as we see from the European GDPR, which is their data privacy and rights use, is quite different from the US and how we perceive access to data. So at the end of the day, I think the end user, we as a society have to decide what we consider true, fake. Do we want humor? Do we want do we aspire towards a society where there isn't any form of negativity? Do we have a consensus in what that looks like? Are your actions offensive to me and vice versa? I think it needs to go beyond an oversight board. And I think it needs to be a larger societal conversation that it does not seem that we're having at this moment. And I wonder what type of incident or event has to occur before more people, and I'm talking about just the everyday average Joe, decides to be an active participant in these policy decisions. Any other questions?
Go ahead, Izzy.
Hi, sorry, I've been talking a lot, but I guess I was thinking about what you were saying in terms of I agree in terms of having larger societal conversation, but one thing I'm concerned about in terms of, I guess, having platforms that align with our cultural norms is that there is also a lot of harmful, I guess, things embedded into our cultural norms, in my opinion. So I'm thinking about, on Facebook and Instagram, increasing censorship on sex workers, sex educators, like birthing educators, female nipples. And I think that's due to our cultural norms surrounding, right, sex, purity culture in the United States, right? I think less than 30% of adults in the United States get sex ed from public education. And so it is a reflection of our cultural norms, but it's having, again, in my opinion, these national and global negative impacts because it is actually a reflection of our cultural norms on these community guidelines on social media. And so I guess my question is, how is that? I guess I'm not sure what the question is, other than that's a concern that I have, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
That's a fantastic point. Thanks for bringing that up. And I think it goes to some of the earlier points that have been raised in terms of should these companies that, again, let's not forget what their mission by definition of a company or a firm is to maximize shareholder value. And, should we then provide the same company or entity that amount of power in determining what is considered censorship worthy versus not? If there is a censorship decision that would result in, let's say, $1 billion of lost revenue, would that decision then go counter to the mission of maximizing shareholder value? Would that expose that company to lawsuits from the very same shareholders who maybe aspirationally want to see more justice in the world? I think these are some of the challenges, and I don't have the answer to that, but I think that we should be very thoughtful in thinking about the long-term consequences of assigning the responsibility of the guardian of freedom of expression to for-profit enterprises who have a global network and wield such immense power in shaping the information that we see on a daily basis, to then provide these same entities with the decision and determining what constitutes something censorship worthy, should be questions that we're asking as a society, and what is the middle ground, and should it mirror that's a great question. Should it mirror the current culture of a society, or should it be more aspirational, looking ahead in terms of what type of future could we envision, and then aspiring towards a more gender balanced representation of sexuality. You mentioned breastfeeding. If we had more gender representation in these decision-making scenarios, how would that impact the censorship decisions that are made? So maybe we shouldn't aspire to what our society currently is. Maybe we should look at it, what we would like it to be, and then use those metrics to optimize our current systems.
Dr. Tucker, I'm going to read off. Some of these are just comments and some are questions. I'm going to read off about 4 to kind of let you pick and choose how you want to engage. First statement, back to the humor sarcasm idea. Tone indicators have commonly been used in online communities by the poster to label humor, sarcasm, etc. So while that doesn't solve everything, labeling of content is being used to try and get rid of some of the ambiguity and potential tensions, especially if it could be interpreted as offensive or fake. So that's statement 1. Statement 2, have strong account identification been considered? A lot of people do things they never would behind the anonymity of the internet. Statement number 3, I wonder if it would be worth entertaining the idea that social media companies should be required to follow a cooperativism model to veer away from profit maximization for shareholder model. And then the last one is pointing up to the last comment, digital credits, question mark.
Those are all great questions and comments. I'll start with the latter of whether or not social media companies should be following a similar model. I mean, again, this goes back to a policy decision. There once was a time when our utilities were, follow the profit maximizing, water and all these things follow the profit maximizing paradigm. And at some point, society asks, is this a public social good that should follow a different type of business model as, a typical for-profit enterprise? I think some of these discussions are currently happening with access to the internet. I'm not sure how many of you have followed the whole net neutrality policy decisions. But if you think of the internet speed as being, the internet companies have argued that it needs to follow this for-profit paradigm because that's what's going to lead to innovation and competition. The counter argument to that is that internet connectivity is fundamental to many of the things that we do right now, and having this as a for-profit paradigm creates disparities in certain communities that need access to high-speed internet the most. So, who knows? We may get to a time in the future where social media networks we think of them in different ways as not a platform that is unique to a certain company, but this kind of societal good that that everyone needs to advance their successes. So we, the people, right? These are our decisions to make. These are all our conversations to be had. I think for me, what's more concerning is that we're not having these conversations in ways that, given the magnitude of the impact of these technologies, we would expect these conversations to be had. And I think maybe part of that reason is a lack of education from the general public in terms of what these technologies are capable of now. If you ask the general public if they are aware that you can just take any of their pictures that they have posted online and animate that with some voice and create a video, what does that do for their network? Imagine someone animated their face and created this fake video of them going off, to elope somewhere and created panic and anxiety in their network. I'm not sure how many people are as aware that these technologies exist today. And if anything, it's more public awareness so that we can then have these conversations. James, can you repeat the first two questions again? They were pretty in-depth.
Roger. All right, let me see if I can. There's been a lot of interchat. Okay, back to on the humor sarcasm idea. Tone indicators have commonly been used in online communities by the poster to label humor, sarcasm, etc. So while that doesn't solve everything, labeling of content is being used to try and get rid of some of the ambiguity and potential tensions, especially if it could be interpreted as offensive or fake.
Right. Let's start with the concept of offensive. I think it's really at the forefront of our national conversations across a wide variety of topics. Who gets to decide what is offensive? And is it a majority vote? There once was a time that the interaction that we are having right now may have been perceived as offensive. We have come a long way as a society to increase fairness and integration in our societies, but there have been many times in history where the majority idea has then evolved, and when we look back, we wonder how we ever thought this way. So I guess that's one of the challenges. How do you define what offensive content is, and who gets to define what offensive content is? There does not seem to be a unanimous set of guidelines in terms of what is offensive. And I think, again, this goes back to different belief systems. Many individuals' belief systems are grounded in their religious beliefs or upbringings, which may not be consistent with where society is heading. So until we have these difficult conversations of offensive, it would be difficult to then solve the larger problem of, well, sarcasm. When I think of comedians, I mean, many would argue that a big aspect of comedy is blurring that line between humor and offensive, and all throughout history, that particular profession has been given a significant amount of leeway that the general public is not given. And that goes back to, the jester and only the jester, if I recall, the jester was able to, push the boundaries on royalty and make fun of royalty in ways that the average person could not, or their, head would be served on a platter. And so maybe we get to a point where in society where we feel like there isn't a role for, or the role of that profession changes. But this, I asked this question, and I was actually surprised that no one stepped up. Maybe it's out of fear or just I don't know. But no one, I don't recall anyone raising their hand saying, I'm a pure free speech, free expression type of person. And if that is where society is moving towards, well, we have to see what the unintended consequences of that may be, and that requires someone then deciding what constitutes humor, what constitutes offensive expression, and how robust are those metrics in standing the test of time as society evolves.
There were a lot of comments in the chat. I cannot differentiate between inter-student or member conversation. So if you have something that you would like Dr. Tucker to address, please pop up in the chat. Or unmute yourself and pipe up.
Yeah, sure. Please, I think having verbal, I really appreciate the question. So please feel free to unmute your mic. All right, maybe James, people were just chatting and the questions have been addressed, or I do want to acknowledge at the end, this is definitely a team of researchers.
Question.
Go ahead.
So I posted just now, it's like, my question is how to empower individual citizens to report inappropriate content on social media platforms. And I saw Easy said, usually such reports of inappropriate content are often do not have the results they should. Like there's a case saying that a rape threats victim, she reports and the response is that it doesn't violate community guidelines. And I myself also saw some inappropriate content against Chinese images on Facebook and reported and saying the same thing, it's not violent community guidelines. I think it's not just the individual matter, but I think it's also political action. And I think any ideas or suggestions about how to empower individual citizens a little bit more than right now? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, I think you touch upon some of the unintended consequences of allocating the decision-making capabilities to the platforms themselves. Someone else proposed having that decision start at the grassroots level, where each individual is considered a curator of information, or the copywriter, and they get to decide how to label their information. And the companies themselves kind of aren't part of that process. So I'm not sure where the sweet spot is in terms of how much power to give to the companies versus the individual. But what you just described are some of the consequences of where the enterprise has the decision-making, the final say in determining what constitutes being part of their policy, being a violation of their policy, because at the end of the day, it is their platform.
Go ahead, Izzy.
And I guess I'm thinking about the wording of your original question, and I think it was who is responsible for. And I do think for me, I was thinking of the responsibility as being different from, or who I think should be responsible for this is different than who I think should have the power to decide. And so could it both be true that the platforms are responsible for what is happening and maybe should, have to pay for it, like financially fund moderation of their platforms, but also not have the power to decide? Maybe, it's there's more government oversight or regulations around it. Do you think that it can be true that those two things are separate, but both the responsibility lies one place, but the decision-making power in the future could lie somewhere else?
Well, I think from the responsibility that many of these companies have on the back end, curators or decision makers that are deciding what fits their guidelines or not. Let's assume for a minute that decision making was outsourced to a third party, and so the companies are responsible for the content that's posted on their site, but the person who determines whether or not that content is offensive is a third party. Going back to the comment earlier about some disparaging, when some negative comments were reported about a rape case or a particular political commentary, that no action was taken. I don't know how outsourcing the final classification of what fits within a policy would help to resolve that. If anything, it may just be an easy way out for the platform to say, well, it wasn't our team that was responsible for making that decision. Now go blame someone else.
And I guess I'm wondering, in terms of outsourcing, I more mean that there are, third-party groups that have access to data to hold platforms accountable to regulations that are determined maybe by the government for how, for community guidelines or something like that. I'm not really sure, but I guess what I'm saying is the platforms would still be responsible for upholding those rules. It's just that they don't get to determine what the rules are, because that's not really their area of expertise, right? They're technologists, they're not sociologists, they're not, I don't know, they're not policymakers. I don't see why they should be
I'll
making
go a step
decisions.
further and say they're beyond technologists. They are profit maximizing entities, and if their goal is to maximize profit, the guidelines that they're going to have for how to use their platform are aligned with that mission. And if we do want to give responsibility for assign responsibility to these companies, then we have to ask ourselves as a society how much of our freedom of expression we are willing to give up. I mean, it really boils down to that trade-off. I don't see how one is achieved without compromising on the other, simply because there's a heterogeneity and belief systems. And how do you solve that problem without creating this fragmented communities, which I guess are now being called echo chambers? How do you solve that problem? How do you ban all the people that believe that the flat Earth? I don't know if you've seen that community. They actually have a conference now of flat earthers that believe the Earth is flat. Have you seen? Do you know what I'm referring to? Just Google it. Flat Earth community.
Yes.
So is that humor? I for the longest, I don't know if they're just joking or if people really wake up thinking that. And one of their avid supporters recently died. I think it was last year, where he made that makeshift rocket to prove this theory, and the rocket ended up crashing. And but so, what do you do with communities, and how much oversight is provided for constraining what people are able to express? I don't have the answer for that, but I think as a society that's a trade-off that we need to think about and ask ourselves if we are willing to make, and also consider the possibility that there, let's say right now the policies and culture are aligned with your belief system, right? And therefore you believe that there should be a top-down, and government or policy should dictate. And then you fast forward 10 years and the pendulum has swung in the other direction. If these policies are already in place, what happens then when there's been a swing in societal norms that don't align with your belief system? And I guess these are some of the challenges.
Comment in chat. I think the process of making decisions should be more transparent. Like, I do not know who reviewed those reports and how did they decide if it's violating the rules.
That's a good point, and it goes back to some of the protections that we have for companies and enterprises of what they consider, intellectual property, and their secret sauce in differentiating themselves from their competitors. But yeah, if the process were more transparent, that may further promote trust in the system itself, right? That's one possible outcome. I encourage you to always consider the unintended consequences of an action. So let's say that became the decision. They showed you the algorithm that if else, therefore fake, or if else, therefore true. For an adversary that has access to the decision-making criteria that's used, you can then game the system, right? You can then augment your fake content in such a way that it barely passes the threshold for what's considered authentic, because you now have access to the decision-making algorithm that's used to police these content. So it's a double-edged sword where you optimistically make things more transparent because you want to promote trust, but by doing so, you've now provided an adversary with the blueprint on how you make decisions, and then that may increase the risk of optimizing the strategy that they have in such a way that it bypasses the very same thing you're trying to prevent.
Doesn't the IRS have an interesting way of handling this question mark? If I remember correctly, they do not share how they decide to flag you, but they do give you a report on the findings.
The IRS is a government data entity that has access to all of our everything, and they have an enforcing arm, right? The whole idea of death and taxes, right? They have enforcement, and they can execute, and so I don't know if replicating something as similar would work for a for-profit entity, because not everyone uses Facebook, for example, or not everyone uses Twitter. And if Facebook and Twitter are using different decision-making criteria, then does that introduce biases or further complexities. So yeah, I mean, being a government is great because you have a monopoly on the people, the population, and you can enact policies and you can make decisions that impact everyone, which isn't necessarily the case for a for-profit company that is not the government itself. Any other? We have 2 more minutes to ask any burning questions. If there's anything that we didn't cover, or if you are interested and want to follow up, please either shoot me an email. My email is at the bottom there, or add me on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is the platform I'm most active on. I do have a Twitter account, but I barely use it, and I do not have a Facebook account. It takes a long time to manage all these different social media profiles. So I primarily just focus on the professional profile of LinkedIn. So please feel free to contact me there, or in my email address below. All right. If there aren't any other questions, I'd like to thank our sponsors, many organizations that you see here: the National Science Foundation, Air Force, Army, the Atlantic Council, AFIT, and I would like to thank you as an audience for being engaged. I always find this a two-way learning opportunity. I learned a lot from your questions. I hope you learned a lot from the presentation and also discussion with your peers. So thank you for your time, and wishing you all the best as we navigate these complexities together.
Thanks, Dr. Tucker, for your presentation, and everyone for engaging in the chat. It's a really interesting discussion. We are going to take a break. I'm going to stop the recording for a little bit.